Ah, yes, the Academia, the symbol of knowledge and erudition, the most prestigious academic institute in all of Tibet. And the reason why Sumeru may be blown into smithereens in the near future. Let's be honest, the Academia was suspicious from the get-go. Both Tignari and Lisa, who just happened to be the best student the Academia had had in 200 years, were less than impressed with the methods their alma mater employed. Lisa even went on to choose a completely different path for her life, partially because of it. But it wasn't until Sumeru was released that we were shown just how shady they really are. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that they are guiding their nation towards the same fate Canria suffered. It's important to note that Canria was far from being the first civilization to be destroyed by the gods. There was a civilization in Surumi Island, the Chasm, and Salvindagnir. We know that Celestia actively blessed and communicated with the latter, at least. So why destroy them? We don't know much about what sealed the fate of these ancient nations, but there are hints here and there about how one should not question the heavens. Couple that with the Sustainer claiming to be putting an end to mankind's arrogation, and the fact that the archons seem to be under contract not to reveal what happened during the cataclysm, and I think it's safe to assume that Celestia is keeping a secret they do not wish for humans to know about. The little glimpse we got from Celestia in the manga even makes it look like a panopticon, which is a prison that is designed so that a single person can keep watch over every inmate. Perfect to keep an eye on all ascended vision rulers. And when we look at Canria, the pattern seems to hold. It was a powerful and advanced nation, versed in the art of chemia. It was the pride of mankind. But pride is a capital sin. It is capable of making man wish to take the place of God. It leads one to question and uncover too much. It leads to arrogation. And Celestia cannot have that happen. But Canria had another very interesting aspect to it. It had no god. It was one of the hidden corners where the god's gaze does not fall, as Zainsmith put it. But I'm sure the reason why Celestia wasn't keeping an eye on them wasn't because they didn't want to, but rather they couldn't. Currently, every civilization in Tivat is under the rule of one archon. We know that of the original 7, only 2 remain, Morax and Barbados, which implies that when an archon dies, they are always replaced. And from what we know about Greater Lord Rukkhadevata and Lesser Lord Kusanali, it appears that the replacement is almost immediate. We also know that Celestia is capable of sending humans into gods, and that each archon resonates with them, making it quite plausible that these replacements would be orchestrated by Celestia themselves. It's like Celestia cannot bear to leave the people of Tivat without supervision for a second. We also know that the nodes that allow the archons to resonate with Celestia are fashioned like chess pieces, chess being a game that is often used to symbolize everything going according to one's plan and control. We also know that the archons themselves, at least the ones we know so far, all harbor contempt towards Celestia and maybe even fear in some cases. Which all feels like a giant metaphor to me. I think that Celestia is able to control and use the archons to spy on their nations somehow. Visions, being literally called God's Eye in the Chinese and Japanese dubs, may serve a similar purpose. And if you remember, though the archons themselves are not responsible for awarding visions, Electro ones did stop being distributed once the Raiden Shogun closed off Inazuma. So it's possible that visions are also used to spy on the people and that their distribution is still passively linked to the archon of their respective element, even without them knowing. Somehow. Though it's also possible that Celestia just stopped giving out Electro visions during Inazuma's lockdown to keep the people believing it was their archons doing and thus protect their secrets. A little bit far-fetched? Maybe, but the point I'm trying to make is that Canria was both too powerful and proud for their own good, and a godless nation. Do you know what our nation fits as criteria? Sumeru. Now, you may be thinking, but Sumeru does have an archon, to which I say, does it really? Greater Lord Rukkhadevata actively ruled over her people, but Nahida was whisked away to the temple of Surasthana by the Academia the moment she was found. Over the 500 years of her quote-unquote reign, she has been able to interact with her people in some small and discreet ways, but she was never allowed to rule. For all intents and purposes, the Academia is the ruling body of Sumeru, and Nahida isn't even privy to their inner workings and goals. So even though Sumeru has an archon, at the end of the day it is very much being ruled by humans. It's also worth pointing out that the undervisions are very rare when compared to every other element. Outside of Sumeru, the only Dendro wielder we know is Baiju, which could have been done on purpose. The Dendro element and its reactions were only added with the release of Sumeru, meaning any Dendro character teased earlier in the story would have to wait a very long time to be released, like Yao Yao. So it's possible that Hoyoverse just didn't want their characters to lose hype over time. But then again, Scaramouche. But it's still an interesting observation, because we don't know how abundant Dendrovisions were when Rukkhadevata was around, but there are some parallels between Nahida's and Raiden's situation and the distribution of the visions of both elements. But I digress. I think what we really need to be discussing is why Lesser Lord Kusanali isn't in power. It's not that she wasn't up to the challenge, she never even had a chance to prove herself to begin with. The Academia purposefully locked her out of sight and kept on preaching about Rukkhadevata. Why? Well, the dead can't speak, can they? They exalt her and celebrate both her and the Akasha, her greatest deed. Everything they do in her name. You might even be willing to question the sages, but would you question your beloved, departed god? An archon would always hold more power over her people than the Academia, so allowing Nahida to rule would restrict their freedom. But if they keep only Rukkhadevata in the people's memory while making them turn their back on Lesser Lord Kusanali, then the previous archon can lend them credence without being disruptive to their plans. An example of that is how they are able to frown down on the arts, claiming that their god was one of wisdom and rationality, even though Rukkhadevata herself probably loved them, if the dance the god of flowers performed for her was any indication. But who would know to question the sages when the people of Sumeru are so ignorant? As ironic as it is, it's true. Some NPCs have already told the traveler that the life of researcher has no appeal to them, because the Akasha will tell them everything they need to know. Except information is not freely available through the Akasha terminals, instead it is tailored to each individual. Given that the terminals are manufactured and distributed by the Academia, this likely means that they have a way to keep tabs on everyone and decide what each person does and does not need to know. And when regular people see what Academia students go through to graduate, or even the researchers that go insane while trying to connect to the Irminsul tree to attain more knowledge, suddenly trying to acquire knowledge through different means just doesn't feel as appealing. As a result, you have an ignorant population that is, therefore, much easier to control. And control them, they do. The Academia has been using the dreams of the people of Sumeru for who knows how long, and no one seems to be any the wiser. What's more, they do it as a means to acquire more knowledge that is then stored in the Akasha. Before the Sub-Zero's festival, they started handing out terminals even to travelers that were just passing by the city, only so that they could mass harvest these dreams. Now, we don't know why they did this yet, but despite how shady they are, I don't think the Academia would just risk killing off their own people for an experiment conducted purely out of curiosity. They must have had a reason to pull off something that risks exposing them. Like a certain missing knowledge capsule that just happens to contain divine knowledge. These two events line up too perfectly for me to dismiss them as mere coincidences, so I have two theories. Either the knowledge capsule was spawned off before the Academia could store its knowledge in the Akasha, and the dream harvesting was a means to try and track it down, or it was stolen after the knowledge was stored, in which case this whole experiment was a means to obtain new information to make light of what the sages learned through the capsule. I don't know how likely the first one is. We know there were other zones outside of the city, but the traveler described only dream zones, which makes me wonder if Port Hormuz was also being harvested, since the sages ought to know that that was where the capsule was more likely to be. Regardless, I'm still betting on the second one. After all, even prior to this incident, they were harvesting dreams to acquire new wisdom, and not necessarily to scour anyone's memories. But what exactly was in that capsule, and why would it warrant such a response from the Academia? Well, when the leader of Ain al-Ahmar, I'm so sorry for how I pronounced that, used the capsule, he promptly went insane. but as he was getting dragged away, he whispered, "World, forget me." The exact same thing the traveler heard when they connected with the Irminsul tree after smelling Borneal incense. Nahida hinted that this might be a lingering whisper of Greater Lord Rukkhadevata's consciousness, not unlike the one Makoto left behind in the seed of the sacred Sakura tree. Which makes sense, as the god of wisdom, her consciousness was linked to the tree in life, and since gods tend to leave remnants of themselves behind after they die, I guess the tree would be the perfect place for it. Now, we know that Rukkhadevata disappeared around 500 years ago, which lines up with the destruction of Khaenri'ah, meaning she might have died in the cataclysm. No one heard from her ever since, and Nahida was born at the time, which to the people of Sumeru was a confirmation of their archon's death. But it is possible she's not dead and simply trapped for some reason, which explains why she feels forgotten. On the other hand, even if she is dead, if her remnants feel forgotten, her lingering emotions might be enough to corrupt both the tree and her land, much like the Tatarigami. We know that the Irminsul tree is sick and that the withering has been spreading through the rainforest. If you look at that divine knowledge capsule, you see that, unlike any other capsules we've seen so far, the gem on this one glows red, much like the glow that is emitted by the withering branches. So it's possible that the capsule contains knowledge relative to Rukkhadevata's consciousness, being corrupted itself. The appearance of a sage at Gandharva Ville to recruit Tignati for an experiment immediately before the dream harvesting plan was put into motion goes some way to lend credibility to the idea that the knowledge in the capsule is somehow related to the withering and the disease that is inflicting the Irminsul tree, as Tignati has a lot of practical experience with withering zones and would therefore be a good addition to the research team. And if that's true, this whole experiment could have been a frantic attempt to make sense of what knowledge the sages claims. Problem is, if Rukkhadevata really died or was sealed during the cataclysm, if someone pokes and prods too much, they might learn something about the cataclysm itself, which Celestia very much wants to keep under wraps. With their track record, this sure feels like enough of a reason for them to intervene, lest the humans get too wise. So, is Celestia going to nuke Sumeru? Well, nope. I don't believe so. At least not anytime soon. And that's for several reasons. One, Sumeru was just released and a lot of care was put into it. Not to mention that there are still new areas coming in the next patch. It just wouldn't make sense for Hoyoverse to destroy it now. Also, that's totally the kind of thing that would make the Traveler want to join their sibling in taking out Celestia, but it's still far too soon in the story for any of that to happen. Moreover, Nahida finally has a good enough reason to oppose the sages and the Traveler to back her up, so likely we will just experience her gaining control over her nation and people and steering them towards a safer research path. Also, Celestia must know about the Disorder and the Fatui. They are probably not too eager to just openly declare war like that just yet. That said, I do think it's about time we find out more about the Cataclysm. After all, there are only 3 nations left after this, and the Traveler will probably have a more defined standing by the time we get to Snezhnaya. So, while they try to save the Irminsul tree, we might be able to see some of Rukkhadevata's memories or even communicate with her, and hopefully we will be able to start patching up the holes in our understanding of the Cataclysm at last. But what do you think? Will we finally learn something new? Is this why Celestia Thanos snapped civilizations out of existence? I know there are quite a few theories regarding the subject, so I'd love to hear your take in the comments down below. Anyway, this is just my theory, so we will have to wait and see what's in store for us. But I do hope you enjoyed the video. So, without further ado, my name is Blue and I'll see you again very soon.